Welcome to Perla 8800S Embroidery Software. This software is geared to expert embroidery design creation. To get started, we're going to take a look at the software, its tools, and the screen layout. We do have over 600 embroidery designs within the software itself. Within the library, you can look at all of the different categories, and once you've chosen a category, you can go to the designs and you can browse through the designs. The first thing we're going to do is take a design and bring it into the working area. Once this comes in, you can see the sequence view of the colors that were used to create that design. If you hit the plus key, it'll give you all of the design objects that were used to create it and the stitch types that were used. If I click on any one of these, you'll notice that the entire object is highlighted. That's because it is not ungrouped. I'm going to hit Control A to select the entire object, go over to Edit, and I'm going to ungroup this entire design. Now, when I grab an independent piece, it will just give me that one item that I'm looking for. Also, all of the properties for that item that I've grabbed will appear in the Properties screen. This shows me the pattern type that was used. It also gives me the underlay, pull compensation. Anything that was within that object that was created will now become visible on your screen. Now we're going to hit the minus key on those three red hearts. This will bring it back to one object. If you'll notice, there's also a little eye. If I click on that eye, the three red hearts disappear on the screen. This is very useful when you're digitizing, because what you do is you load in your artwork as a backdrop, and then you start to build layers of embroidery on top of each other. If you build too many layers, you can't see the original artwork, so this allows you to hide certain objects so that you can still go on with digitizing. There's also a little lock. If I click on that lock, I can no longer grab any of those three red hearts, but I can grab the three yellow hearts because they are unlocked. And then I can grab those and I can edit any specific object that I want. If you want to see how this design was created, we do have a slide bar that allows you to go forward and back throughout the design and see exactly how the design is going to stitch out. This is a helpful tool as well when you are looking at how a design is going to stitch before you get it on the machine. You can also come here and you can have it sort of do a redraw of the design, and you control the speed with a slide bar over here, which will make it go slower and faster as it proceeds through the design. You can always stop that and it will bring it to a pause position, and you can continue grabbing your slider and see exactly how that design will sew. Starting from the very top left to right, we have a lot of standard drop-down menus that are found in most software systems. Now, many of the tools within these drop-down menus are found within the icons that are in the working environment as well. This icon here, this allows you to create a new page. This is a fresh palette that you can import a backdrop image and start digitizing. You can also open existing designs as well as save the work that you are digitizing. It's always a good idea to save your designs in the file format that is specific to this software, which is an EFP file format. This allows you to edit the designs in all of the original properties that they were created. We have unlimited undos and redos. You can hide the properties box and turn it back on, and we also have program preferences. This is very handy because it gives you the environment in which you want to digitize in, but it also allows you to choose the file format that is specific for your machine. And it also gives you recipes so that you can choose any one of these preset recipes when you start your design, and all of the density, underlay, and pull compensation will automatically be built into that file as you digitize. You also have the ability to zoom in and out of your design, fit to page, as well as bring the design to the 1:1 scale, as well as other scales that are available. If you've seen any of my training materials in the past, you know that I'm a 6:1 digitizer. That's the way that I was trained many years ago, so it's very important to me that when I create designs, I either do it in a 600% or 300% zoom ratio. This gives me consistent control while I am creating my designs. I'm going to bring the design to fit back into the screen right now. The next group of icons allows me to see my working environment in different ways. I have a 3D control which will give me a realistic rendering of the design that I'm working on. That can be turned on or off. I can also turn on or off the grids and I can also turn on or off the stitch points. This will show me every single stitch in the design. I can also have a show hoop size. This will give me the hoop size that I am working with on my machine. A lot of times this is very handy so that you don't create a design that is too small or too large within the hoop size that you plan to be using. I'm going to bring that back to fit to screen, and I can also come in and I can change the background. I can choose different background colors for the background of the screen, or I can choose any of the preset fabric types within the menu that is here as well. This will give me a more realistic view that if I want to view the design as it'll look when it is sewn, I can go to 3D and I can see a simulated stitch out on the fabric itself. Now I'm going to highlight the entire design by hitting Control A. Now I can go in and I can play with the design. I can align the designs in different ways. I can come in and I can do a horizontal center align. This will change the design, but don't worry, you can always go back and undo that if you're not happy with the results. I can also flip the design. I can then also flip the design horizontally. It just allows me to go in and to rotate the design and to play with it as I want very easily with these icons at the top of the screen. The next ones allow me to do certain things automatically. I can optimize the sequence of a design. If this design was not digitized properly, the software will automatically look for the smartest sequencing within the design and resequence it automatically. It'll also optimize the entry and exit points of the design so that they will be closest point. You can also do an automatic color sort. If there were too many colors, color changes in this design, it'll automatically reassign the colors by looking for the same color and putting them in a logical order. Now this can be a little bit hit and miss. If a design was digitized properly, I strongly suggest that you don't play with it at all. The next set of tools allow you to do some automatic functions. Auto basting allows you to put a basting stitch around the design, so if you're doing hoopless embroidery, it'll hold the fabric in place to the stabilizer and then do the embroidery piece. You can also do a split wizard. If a design is too large for a hoop, it will automatically split the design into as many sections as needed and give you realignment points so that you can stitch it out as one piece. There is also an auto digitizing wizard as well as an auto cross stitch wizard. Now with these two, please be very careful, because the way it works with any of these automatic tools is you will only get the results that you want based on the artwork that you use. The artwork has to be very clean and very simple to get good results, and for the most part I'm really not a big fan of any of the automatic features within any software program. Now we're going to look at the different ways that we can select the objects within our design. I can always go to my sequence view and I can grab any of the objects that I want to modify or edit. I can also go to the select tool and I can grab any of the objects that I want to edit as well. There is also a lasso tool, and this will allow me to grab any of the objects by drawing a perimeter around them, and then I can right click and it'll grab those objects that I have used that tool for. Now we're going to cover the shaping tool. I'm going to hide the 3 red hearts, and I'm going to zoom in with the magnifying glass to an object that I want to edit. Now if I grab the shape tool, this will allow me to edit outlines, inclination points, which are the stitch directions, and the start and stop positions of any design. So I'm going to grab the shape tool and I'm going to shape those objects. You can see that the green is the start point of the design and the red is the finishing point. Those you lay down logically when you digitize so that your objects always remain closest point. If I change one of these and I enter, it will re-stitch those areas based on the new start and stop positions. I can also edit the inclination points. These will allow me to change the stitch directions of the design, and if I hit enter again, it'll change the way those stitches flow. Now there are blue squares underneath of there. They can sometimes be hard to see, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a right click on any of the inclination points or of the object points, and I can ask it to show all, just the outlines, the inclinations, or the entry and exits. I want to just edit the outlines, and now it'll just show me those points which I want to edit. They do appear in Bezier format, which allows me to grab the handles and control the individual arcs of either side of the point that was laid down. If I hold the Control key down, I can grab numerous points, and then I can move them all as one piece. This becomes very handy when you want to edit an outline of a portion of the design as opposed to doing it individually. I can also grab as many of these as I want, so I'm going to control and hit 4 points, and then if I hit the right click again, it'll allow me to turn it to a line, which now you can see that we're going to have a lined input on the outside of that, or I can ask it to do a cusp, smooth, or symmetrical. This will give me a nice clean arc on all of the points that I'm choosing to edit without having to move them independently one at a time. I can also go in and edit individual stitches. If I hit the Stitch tool, this will allow me to go in and grab individual stitches and pull them out one by one. This is very useful for doing fine-tune editing on a design that you've created. But keep in mind, as soon as you select that object and you go to resequence or to change any of those points, it will automatically go back to the original defaults as soon as you move one of those points. If I move this one a little bit, hit enter, they have all gone back within the original object, and I've lost all of my stitch points which I moved previously. For getting a closer look at your design, there is a magnifying glass that allows you to left click and drag, and it will zoom in to the area that you want to magnify to. There is also a panning tool which will allow you to pan through your design as you're digitizing, or if you want to, you can use the up and down arrow keys and the right and left arrow keys on your keyboard to move around the design as well. I find that the arrow keys are very handy while I'm digitizing, because then I don't have to be switching from one tool to the other, and it does save some time. I can magnify in very closely to an area, and this comes in handy if I actually do want to use the ruler tool. This will allow me to grab one side, and it will allow me to see exactly how long a stitch length is. Right now the distance on this is 1.5 millimeters. And I can see exactly how long things are, so I know if they are going to sew properly on my machine. Now, before we get into the digitizing tools within the software, let's take a look at the keyboard fonts that come with the software itself. When I click the text tool, you'll always see a little letter A appear beside the select arrow. When I click anywhere on the screen, it will automatically bring up my text, and I can now type in whatever lettering I want. You can also change the stitch type, the underlay within that text. There are extra functions as well for trim types and lock types, as well as the sew sequence. You can choose from one of the 100 fonts that are available within the software, apply it, and it will change that font type for you. Now, you can also click on any of the preview windows and see all the characters that are available. Plus, you will see the recommended heights, minimums and maximums in which that text works best. Now, please keep in mind that it's always a good idea to stay within those minimums. There are also true type fonts available. Now, those, in my opinion, are a little bit hit and miss because they have not been digitized to sequence properly, and you will need to do extensive editing on those because they were not custom digitized. You can control the height, the spacing, the width, the line spacing between all of the text that you choose, and then you have all of your functions within the text that allow you to modify it to exactly how you want. At this point, there are a lot of options on how you can modify your text. You can grab all of the tools and you can play with them, and you can move the design around. You can also take the individual points and I can move them. Now here I am just arcing the top portion of the text. If I grab the bottom point, I can also arc the bottom portion of the text. The tools on the side, they allow me to make the text longer on one side, so I can control how wide the text is itself as a whole. I can also come to this piece and I can control how big the text is. I can make it larger or smaller as a whole without really ruining any of the changes that I've made so far. I can also take the text and I can turn it on a slant from one direction to the other. Now on the inside we can see that there are little light blue triangles and little gold squares. These are handy because if I grab this little blue triangle here and I move it, it'll only move the text from that position forward. And this is handy because if I want to move this a little bit, because I want to make the letter Y a little bit bigger, I can grab the gold box and now I can modify just that one letter of that text that I've laid out and change the attributes so that it'll still have the proper kerning between the fonts. Now if we choose the circle tool within the embroidery fonts that are loaded within the program, again you choose the icon and you click anywhere on the screen. Automatically my text appears in there, and this is when you can type in pretty much anything that you want. We're going to type in Perla 8800S, and for a lower line let's type in Embroidery Software. Now we are putting a lot of text in here, and when I apply you're going to notice that it's going to really mess up on screen. We have a lot of text that's overlapping each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that top handle and I'm going to make this smaller until I see the lettering appear kind of the way I want it. Now it's going to be legible on the screen. Now I'm going to take this one and I'm going to move it up so that I can increase the size of it, and then I'm going to go back to the top handle and I'm going to increase the size of the font. This will allow me to space it exactly how I want it on screen so it does look like a separated top and bottom line. Now you can go in and grab the gold squares and you can grab the light blue diamonds, and you can modify each letter as you want as well. Now the monogram tool is something that you'll really want to spend a little bit of time playing with. Once you choose the icon and click anywhere on the screen, the monogram will appear. You can modify the text the same way as you did with your regular text functions. You can choose a height, slant, width. You can play with all of the little icons that are on the screen. You can choose different font types as well, and you will notice that as we choose different font types, we will have different little decor embellishments appear. Now once we choose the monogram that we want, we can choose the embellishment that we want to go with it, apply it, and they will appear on the side. These make for great little gift ideas, and they're very quick and fast to do. On the bottom you can see we have our color palette. Because the monogram is highlighted, I can click to any of the colors that are on the palette and it'll automatically change it to that color that I've selected. If I want to use a different thread manufacturer, all of the manufacturers are listed and I can choose Robison Anton Poly. If I happen to know the name of the color I'm looking for, I can type in Foxy Red and I can ask it to find that specific color. Then I can click on that color and it'll be listed in the thread manufacturer's color name and their ID code number. Now this is handy for when you want to print off your production sheets for the samples or the designs that you're going to run, because that way the exact colors are listed for the thread types that you have. Now there's three more fun tools that I'd like to show you, but first I have to go to my toolbars and I'm going to get rid of my color palette so that it frees up some area on the screen. Now I'm going to select the object that I brought onto the screen, and now I'm going to hit this icon that says Power Paste. Now what's neat about this is as soon as I activate this, I can now grab any point in the design and I can paste the motif or any object that I've selected, and it will automatically bring in as many pieces as I want. So if I want to do a really nice little design layout and do it relatively quickly, it will actually resize the designs quite well because you are talking about an EFP file, and I can do a nice design layout very quickly on the screen. There are also some preset templates that you can play with as well. If we select this flower and go to our templates, we have all of these different templates that you can use. These are great for doing along collars of garments. You can lay out that template. You can then tell it to adjust the properties of the template itself as well as the design properties. If I want these flowers to be a little bit bigger, I can apply and then press OK, and then I'll have a template that is already color sorted. So all of the colors have been sorted so that you won't have way too many color changes for each of these flowers. Now all you have to do is save that to your embroidery file format that you want to run on your machine. At the very bottom we have a circle template. Again, if we select the design that we want to use within the template, go to the very bottom and click on Circle Templates, it'll give us a template where we can control the circle dimensions, we can control how many actual flowers are within that template, we can adjust the size of the designs themselves. If I want to make these a little smaller, I'll hit apply and they'll be a little bit smaller, and then I press OK. Again, there is an automatic color sort function in here. It'll auto rotate or reflect the designs. Once I press OK, it's going to recalculate everything and lay this design out as one piece, but only using 4 colors. And as you can see, we save this in whatever file format we want, put it on our machine, and it'll run all as one piece. Now we're going to look at the digitizing tools within the software and how to go about starting a new design. The first thing we have to do is create a new page. So we're going to click New. Then we can go to our Program Preferences. At this point, you can choose the recipe that you want for the design. I'm going to leave it on jeans because I found that with the jeans recipe, the adequate amount of underlay, density, and pull comp in a design is pretty good for most materials. If you want to do everything manually, then you would go to normal. So we're going to keep it on jeans, and I'm going to keep my format to PES, or whatever machine format you use for your machine. Now, when we look at the actual tools for digitizing, there are 3 different tools. There's a line tool, a Bezier tool, and a freehand tool. Now, if I choose a line tool, you'll notice that nothing really happens on the screen if I try to click. The reason being is whatever tool you choose, whether it is line, Bezier, or freehand, you have to assign a stitch type to that tool. So if I leave it on line tool, I have to make sure I choose a run path, a satin path, an applique, a steel, or a complex fill, which is assigned to the drawing tool that I'm using. But it would help if we had a backdrop image in there first. So I'm going to click on Backdrop tool, and we're going to bring in an image. Now I'm going to choose a very simple image for the first step of this, and this image is in the software. I'm going to open it up and it's going to bring it onto the screen. Now you'll notice that it is in the Properties box, and I'm going to actually make this image a little bit lighter so that we can see what's happening on the screen as we generate stitches. Now that I have my image on the screen, I'm going to zoom in to the image, but I'm going to go into a specific scale. I'm going to go to 300% for this example. Normally I zoom in to 600% because that's the way I've been doing it for many years, and it's easy for my brain to figure out as to what I see on the screen and to how it's going to stitch out are going to be the same. So it is good to stay at a consistent scale when you are digitizing. 300% is also easy for me to figure out because it's half of what I normally do. Now I'm going to stay with my line tool, and I have to assign a stitch type. So I'm going to choose the run. Now the way this works is when I click a point down with my left click on my mouse, it's automatically going to be a straight point. If I hold the control key down, it's automatically going to make that point into a curve. But when I do come back to a straight point, I want to make sure that I take my finger off the control key, put a straight point down, and follow it with another straight point, and then continue on by holding the control key. This allows me to have nice clean points instead of curves in areas where I really don't want them. Now I'm going to go back to a straight point, and then continue on with my curve, and I can pan through my design and continue with my curve points, straight point, do curves, and continue to just outline very easily all the points on my design. 2 straights, and again I'm going to my control key and I'm putting down my curve points. I'm going to pan and get the area of the screen that I want to digitize on, and continue to hold the control key down, straight point, going back to curves, and I'll continue all the way around the outline of this design until I get back to where I started. I try to put a straight point at the very end, and then there is a icon that says close shape. As soon as I close this shape, it'll automatically turn it into a run stitch. I could have also clicked the right key on my mouse, which would have closed the shape as well. Now if I look at this in 3D, you'll see that the stitches automatically appear. I'm going to make this a little bit lighter so that hopefully we'll see those stitch points on the screen. And you can also see that on my properties I have a 3mm stitch length. Now I can change that to 5mm if I want, hit apply, and you can see that the spaces between the stitches automatically changed. Now that I've created this object, I'm going to go to a 1:1 scale, or let's fit it to screen so that we can see all of the stitches. Now in my properties it says that this is a single run, and the stitch count at the bottom says that it is 145 stitches. If I want to change this from a single run to a double run, all I have to do is click double run, hit apply, and now you'll see that my stitch count has changed to 289 stitches. If I want to change it to a bean stitch, which is really 3 passes of thread, I hit apply again and it'll now change it to 433 stitches. This is a great way to automatically change from a single, double, or triple pass of threads just by changing the type here in the properties box. I can also change to a motif. If I want to choose any one of the preset motifs, and there's lots and lots of them to choose from, I just have to hit the apply and it's now changed to one of the motifs that are available in the software. And if I want to change it to another motif, I just again choose a different motif, apply, and it's going to change it to that motif stitch type as well. So that's a great little tool. Now we also have different commands. You can actually change the commands from normal to trim. Now this is great if you have a high-end machine which has automatic trimmers, because it's automatically going to put in a trim function after every satin stitch path that you create. You can also do a tie-in, a basic tie-in and tie-off, or have none if you want to do them automatically. Most machines do actually put 3 stitches down at the end of every object and tie in themselves, but it's always a good idea to make sure that you tie in while digitizing designs as well, in case something goes wrong and the thread comes out. We just drew that object using the line tool. I'm going to come back to 300%, pan over on my screen, and now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to use my Bezier. Now the Bezier, it works, again, you have to make sure that you choose a stitch type with whatever drawing tool you're using. And the way it works is if I click and I just click down very quickly, it'll create a straight point. If I want to do a curve, then I have to click and drag, and you can see that the handles actually change. The shorter the handle, the less of an arc. The longer the handle, the more the arc will change. So I can come in here and I can create, by clicking and dragging, a curve shape exactly the way I want it. Now, a lot of people who are in the graphics industry, they are very familiar with using a Bezier tool, and they find it very, very fast and productive. I'll be honest with you, if you have not used it before, it does take a little bit of getting used to, and you'll probably be more comfortable with the line tool. But if I right click right now, it has created virtually the same shape as we did using the regular line tool. Now the freehand tool is one of my favorites, but you do have to be careful when you use it, because it really is like you're drawing with a pen. Remember, you have to assign a stitch type to whatever tool you're using. Now if I do want to outline this area, if I'm using a mouse, you'll find that it's very, very hard to control the path. Even if you are using a pen tablet like I am, you'll see that it becomes very, very jagged as it's moving around. So if you're doing something that you want to be very clean and really to follow the artwork, I don't think that the freehand tool is your best option. But if you are doing something that is creating realistic embroidery, if you want to do blending or shading within a design, then the freehand tool becomes very, very useful, because you can literally just trace over something and be as artistic as you want with those stitches. We've just covered the line, the Bezier, and the freehand tool in conjunction with the running stitch. Now before we get to the satin path, I'd like to talk about the applique and the steel stitch. Now the applique and the steel stitch are one and the same because they react kind of the same way. I'm going to bring in a different backdrop image, and we'll call up this image here, which is in your software, and we're going to go to our 300%. This will actually give us a line tool utilizing an applique, and I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to hold my control key down, and about every 3/4 of an inch to an inch apart I'm going to start putting my points, and I'm going to try to put them as close to the artwork as I can see. Now the reason why you want to put your points down between 3/4 of an inch to an inch apart at 300% is because I want to define the shape as closely as possible. If my points are too far apart, what's going to happen is it's not going to define the shape the way I want it to, and it's going to kind of throw it off a little bit. So now I've come close to my ending point. I'm going to close the shape, and it's going to automatically give me an applique. Now as you can see, the stitch that it's showing is a blanket stitch, and the blanket stitch throws the stitches towards the inside right onto the line that I digitized. And that's kind of good because that'll hold that in place perfectly. But if I select that stitch and change it to a satin stitch, then you're going to see that it's going to throw the stitches off from the center, and it's going to be about 50% from the outside in and the inside out, and that will hold down the applique properly. The same will happen with the motif stitch. That'll also hold the applique in place and place down the motif stitch where I want it, but it'll be placed about 50% in from the line that I've just created. So you can see that that will hold that applique in place, but it will keep the stitches towards the outside. Now the reason why I said the applique and the steel stitch are very similar to each other is because they react the same way. If I choose my line tool and I choose a steel stitch and I put down my first point and then put down my next points holding the control key down, it will give me the curve the way I want, and I can pan down the design using my arrow keys. As I create this shape, I want to make sure that I don't go too far apart because it will distort the shape if I do. Once I get close to the beginning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the top and I'm going to close that shape. As soon as I close the shape, it's going to give me a steel stitch. Now if you notice, the underlay is automatically put in based on the recipe that I chose, which was the jeans recipe. If I choose and highlight that object that I just created, I can change the width of the stitch, and I'll go to 2 millimeters now, but you'll notice that it's still going equally from the inside out and the inside in on either side based on the width of the stitch. Now remember, you can always control the density of a stitch as well. I can change that from 0.4 millimeters, which is usually good for most standard embroidery directly on a garment, but we'll go to 0.6. That'll loosen the density, and you see that the stitches have changed. So both those stitches, the applique and the steel, they do react the same way. The line that you digitize around the design, it'll throw the stitches out from that line to the outside and the inside depending on the width of the stitch that you've chosen. Now I'm going to show you how to make a complex fill. We have our line tool selected. I'm going to choose complex fill. I'm going to zoom in to 300%, which is a scale that I'm comfortable with for digitizing at. I'm going to put my first point in, and then I'm going to hold the control key down to define my shape. Now I'm using my arrow keys to move around the object that I'm digitizing, and I'm going to make sure that I pan or use my arrow keys to get around that shape. When I get close to the point that I've started, I can either close the shape with the tool or the icon here, or I can right click. Now you'll see that the inclination point became apparent as soon as I clicked on the right click. I'm going to go to fit to screen, and I'm going to make this a horizontal stitch. So now that I've created a horizontal stitch, I'm going to hit right click again. I can put in my start and my stop point on the design, and it will have created all the stitches within that object. To give you a little bit of a better view, I'm going to make it a little bit lighter, And you can see that I have a horizontal stitch for that fill. I can use different fill types. If I want to change the fill type, I can choose one of the preset fills and it'll change that. I'm going to go off of 3D. Now if I do want to carve a hole within a fill, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit complex fill again, and I'm going to carve whatever hole I want within that shape. So now I've created that shape. Again, I'm going to right click. I'm going to right click again. I'm going to choose a start and a stop point. And now if I turn on the 3D, you'll see that it looks like I have two fills on top of each other. But what I'm going to do is go to my sequence view, and I'm going to right click on that object, and it'll say combine. If I click combine, it will carve a hole in that object. Now the only thing I have to watch out for is when I click on editing that shape, my inclination point changed. So I'm going to make sure that I move my start and my stop out of the way, and that way I can move my inclination point so that my design is again horizontal, but I have carved a hole within that shape. Now if I wanted to put a border around this globe, I'm going to turn off the 3D, I'm going to go back to my 300% scale, I'm going to pan up towards the top, I'm going to choose my line stitch and my steel, I'm going to start towards the top, hold the control key down, and I'm going to outline the shape. Now I'll make sure that I can see the artwork in its entirety as I'm outlining the shape, and as I get around to the beginning of the shape, I do not want to right click. If I right click, it'll only give me the shape that I've just created, but I do want to close the shape. When I close the shape, it'll automatically give me a border around the outside that'll connect towards the top. If I want to change the width of that border, I'm going to hit the plus key, which will give me all of the different stitch types that I've created. I can now change it to 2 millimeters width and apply, and it's going to make it smaller. Now there are a lot more options to play with within our complex fills. If I select the object that I've created and I want to change that fill type, I can go in and change it to any of the preset fills that are automatically built within the software. This will change the type of fill within that object that I've created. I can also come in and I can change from a standard type fill to a fancy fill. These are carved fill patterns which are within the software, and there's lots of carved fill patterns to choose from. They range all the way from carved to diamonds to geometric to patterns. I can choose any one of these patterns, apply it, and it'll automatically go within that shape that I've digitized. I can also use my motif fills. This will take that same shape and create a motif pattern within the fill area that I have created. I have lots of different motifs, the same ones that are available when I showed you the same function within the line tool with the running stitch. I can choose any one of these motif patterns, apply it, it'll automatically change it. We also have the ability to wave any of these patterns that I want. This is giving me a wave fill, and if I right now choose my shape option, I can change the pitch of the wave, hit enter, and it'll automatically change that wave fill to whatever pattern or wave fill that I have chosen. Now I'm going to show you how to use a satin path tool. I'm going to zoom into 600%. I'm going to choose my line tool with my satin path, and if I left click, it will give me a straight line down one side. When I get to the other side, I can hold the control key down, which will give me a curve. When I get back up to where I started, I can right click. It gives me the ability to put in my stitch directions, and then I can right click again, which will give me my start and my stop points, and now I have a straight edge on one side and a curve on the other. Now I'm going to change the color slightly so that we can see it on screen. This time I'm going to do kind of the same thing but a little bit different. I'm going to choose the satin path, and I'm going to start on one side and hold the control key down, which will give me a curve, and I'm going to then put a straight point down and then go and curve to the other side. Now I have something that looks pretty much like a leaf. At this point, I'm going to close the shape. And right away I can put my inclination points in, and now I'm going to fan my points from the center and change the stitch direction slightly so that I have a contoured effect which is going to go from one side to the other. Now this is a satin stitch right now. If I hit the little plus sign in my sequence view, I can grab that satin path that I just created and I can choose a different fill. I'm going to choose a random fill. I'll press apply, and now I have a fill that has a curved effect, and this is really handy when you're trying to do realistic looking petals within flowers. Now that you know how the satin path tool works within the software, let's digitize a simple design. We're going to go to our backdrop tool and bring in one of our images within the software, and let's just bring in this image right here. I'm going to open it up, and the first thing I like to do is lighten the image a little bit so that I can see it on screen and it's a little easier on the eyes when I digitize. I'm going to zoom in to 600%, and I'm going to scroll over to the object that I want to digitize, and at this point I'm going to go to my program preferences and I'm going to choose the recipe that I want. Let's use PKNit for this one. Remember that when you choose a recipe, all of the densities, the underlay, and the pull compensation for whatever you're digitizing is going to automatically be applied. I'm going to choose my line tool with my satin path, and I'll put my first point down. I'm going to hold my control key down, which will give me a curved effect, and I'll just outline around the outside of this object. When I get back to the top, I'm going to take my control key off and do a straight point, and then control and curve around the inside. When I get to this point, I'm going to take my finger off the control key and create a defined point and then put it back on to give me a curve. Now I want to press my right click, which will give me my stitch directions, and this will allow me to control the flow of the stitches. I want to make sure that I put them down the same way that I would like to see the machine create those stitches as it goes around that curve. I'm going to right click again, put my start and my stop point in, and I've created that object. You can see how it's actually larger than what I digitized. That's because we did choose PKNit, and there's a lot of pull compensation within that recipe. Now I've panned up a little bit. I'm still within my line and satin path. These areas are very close together, so I'm just going to put a point here, left click, left click, left click, one more. I'm going to now right click to close the shape, put my inclination points in, right click again, start and stop point, and it created that object right there. Now the space between these two is a little longer, so just to be safe, I'm going to go to my run stitch and put 2 points down, and I'm going to right click again. I just did that so that it wouldn't trim between those objects on my machine if a machine does have trimmers. I'm going to use my satin path again, and I'm going to put my point down with a left click, and then I will come back to the beginning. I'm going to right click, which gives me my inclination points, right click again for start and stop, and now I have created that line. Now if I want to go from here to here, I do need to switch back to my run. I'll put a point here because it's close to where I ended, another point here, I'll right click, which will give me a line, and now I can do the last piece. So let's go back to satin path. I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to hold the control key down to curve. I'm going to pan so that I can see the design on the screen. I'll continue to hold the control key down and define the shape. I'll use my arrows to move around on the screen so that I can see the entire image as I'm digitizing. We'll come to the bottom, and I'll hold the control key down, and I'll continue to go around the outside of this object. When I get towards the inside where I can see that point coming up, I just want to make sure that when I do this point here, I do not have my control key activated. I'm going to then create a sharp point, hold the control key again, and this will go back to a curve. Now I'm going to continue to go around the inside of the object, and we'll pan again using our arrow keys to the beginning of where I was, and I want to get back to my starting point, at which time I'm going to try to end my starting point so that it is nice and even with the first point that I created. Now I'm going to right click, it gives me my stitch directions. Again, I'm going to put my direction or my inclination points in so they curve smoothly around the object. This defines how your machine will actually stitch, and I can just go from inside out or outside in anywhere on the object to put these points down. If you're unhappy with any of these, you can always just go back onto the point and move the stitch direction. You just want to make sure that it's going to flow nicely as it moves around the object. And there's my last point. I'm going to right click again, I'm going to move up, and I want my start point to be right here, and I want my end point to maybe be right here. I don't like ending at the end of an object because your machine does tie out and that would become visible. And now we've created that object. So I'm going to go to fit to screen so that we can see this, and if I turn our 3D on, you can see that we have a very simple object which has been pathed properly, and all of the areas that are underneath of the other stitches, they're going to be covered up as they move around. Everything's going to flow nice and smoothly. Now that you've learned all the tools within the software, let's digitize a design from beginning to end. You're going to call up a new page within the design, and we're going to go to our backdrop tool, and we're going to bring in one of the images that is within the software. We'll digitize this flower. Now remember, as we're doing this, you're going to want to pause and play as we're going through this design and do it at your own pace. Once I call in this artwork, I do sometimes prefer to lighten the image so that I can see it on screen and it won't be too bright. I'll be able to see my stitches being created. And at this point, I'm going to choose my recipe from my program preferences. Now it is on jeans, and we're going to leave it on that right now. If it isn't, you can switch it to whatever recipe you want, and this will put in the appropriate amount of pull compensation and underlay for the material type that we've chosen. I'm going to press OK, and now I'm going to go to my zoom and I'm going to fit this to screen. Now the reason why I'm doing this first is I'm going to choose my line tool with my run stitch. You have to remember that this is going to be sewn on a piece of material with stabilizer underneath, and sometimes it's a good idea if I put in a few stitches underneath that is going to stabilize this design to the material and the backing that I'm using, and I won't have to worry about as much movement happening with this design as I'm creating all of these objects. This is really going to give me a good foundation on which to lay the design down. So there I've stabilized that area, and I'm going to right click, and you're going to see that the stitches are generated on screen. Well, let's come here and we're going to choose in our sequence view those stitches, and let's make them something a little closer to the color of the artwork that I'm digitizing. Now that I have my underlay stitches put in, I'm going to go down to my 6:1, which is the scale that I like to digitize at. I know that this was my last point here. I'm going to choose my underlay again, and I'm going to start here, and I'm going to put a few stitches back and forth just to stabilize the area, because I know that my jeans recipe will put a edge run underlay around the outside, but I want a little more stitches on the inside because this is getting a little bit wide for a satin stitch. I'm going to right click, and now I'm going to choose my satin path. Now I'm going to cut short the first stitch at the top a little bit, because I'm at 6:1. I have to take into account not only the pull compensation but also the pull of the design as well. So I have pull and push. I'm going to overlap the area that is going to be covered up by other stitches so that I do not have any separation in the design. I'm going to go back to control. When I get to the top, I'm going to right click, put in my inclination points, and then I'm going to right click again. I'm going to put in my start and my stop point, and I've just created that object. Now I'm going to go back to my run, and I'm going to go to the next object that I want to digitize. Digitizing is all about pathing through a design properly so that you have as few trims in the design as possible. I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to go to my satin path, and again, cutting short, I'm going to hold my control key down. I'm going to overlap a little bit. That way it's going to be covered up. I don't have to worry about it separating and seeing the fabric underneath. Hold the control key down, and I'm going to right click again, put in my stitch direction points, and then right click my start and my stop, and I've created my next piece. Go to my run stitch. I will go from my last point, and I'm going to pan over a little bit so I can see the next point that I'm doing, and I'm going to put in some stitches underneath to secure that object. Right click, go to my satin path, cut it short a little bit, hold the control key down to give me a curve. I'm going to overlap a little bit so that the separation doesn't happen, and then again go to control. When I get to the point that I'm going to start at, I'm going to right click, put my stitch directions in. I'm going to right click again, start and stop, and now I'm ready for my run stitch. Continue down the path. Digitizing is very dimensional. You're always doing the areas that are underneath of objects that are going on top. That way, when it sews out, it's kind of like doing a piece of artwork. You do the objects that you see in the background first, and then you do the objects that are in the forefront last. Control key gives me my curve. I'm overlapping my stitches again. Get back to where I started. I can hold the control if I want a curve, and I'm going to right click, put my stitch directions in, right click again, put my start and my stop, and now go to the running stitch. So we're going to continue through the design, and we're going to do all of the pieces exactly the same way. Entering my running stitches, going to my satin path, starting my path, putting curves where I see necessary, making sure that I overlap areas that I want to be covered up. When I get that back to the beginning, again, right click, gives me my stitch directions, right click again, gives me my start and my stop point, and then we'll continue with our run stitch. From our last point, we'll do the next piece that we see, and we'll do this petal exactly the same way as we did the others. So really what we're doing is we're repeating the exact same steps for each of these petals that we know are going to be held in place underneath of other objects that need to be digitized. Inclination points, right click, start and stop, back to our run stitch. We're going to go over, we're going to hold down some of that object that we know is going to need some, to be stabilized within the fabric. Go back to our satin path, cut it short a little bit, control key to give me a curve. We're going to make sure that we overlap or underlap a little bit in the areas that are going to be covered up, and then we'll continue to right click, put our direction points down, right click again, start and stop. We'll pan up so we can see the area on screen, go back to our run, make sure that our run starts closest to our last ending point, stabilize the material, right click, go to our satin path, cut it short a little bit, hold our control key down for our curves, and then we're going to continue around with the overlap, come back, hold our control key down, make sure that we end with our stitch, and we're going to put our inclination points in, right click again, start, stop point, go back to running stitch, and we'll do each of these petals individually. As you get into the flow of this, you'll see that it actually is pretty quick to do. Digitizing becomes faster and faster as you practice. Control as we go around, and we're going to make sure our overlap or underlap is in place, and control, bring it back to the beginning point, right click, put our stitches down, stitch directions down. We can move them if we're not happy. Right click again for start and stop, go back to our run stitch, put some stabilizing stitches down within that object, right click again, go to our satin path, cut short the first stitch, control, make sure that it's going to overthrow a little bit so it's going to be covered up, control again, get back to where we started, right click, our inclination points are in place, right click again, start and stop, and now we've done all of the petals that are underneath of other objects. Now I'm going to go to my run stitch and I'm going to stabilize this piece right here. I'm going to generate the running stitch, go to satin path, and I'm going to do the exact same thing with my control. Make sure that I extend that area, and then I'm going to come over here, extend this side, come back to where I know that it's meeting true to the artwork, control, get back to where I started, right click, put my stitch directions in, right click again, start and stop point, and then I can continue with the next side. Now you'll notice that I'm going to be going this way around the design. I'm going to be going clockwise. The reason being is I can see that this area is going to be covered, so it would make sense for me to do this petal first. I'm going to use my run stitch, put in some stabilizing stitches in that area, right click, go to my satin path, cut it short a little bit, hold the control key down, go right down to there, go across to the other side, extending it, control key again for a curve, right click, stitch directions in place, right click again, start point, stop point. I've created that object. I'm going to pan over so I can see on screen. Again, go to a running stitch, put in some stabilizing underlay using my running stitch, go back to satin path, and continue to hold the control key down to give me my curve, go straight across, make sure that I'm extending it so that it's going to allow for the overlap, come back to where I started, right click, stitch direction, and then I'm going to right click again, start and stop point, and again continuing with a running stitch. Always making sure that I'm starting my running stitch to where I ended my last object. I'm going to go back to my satin path, cut it short a little bit, control to give me a curve, get to my area at the bottom, go all the way across, make sure that I'm overlapping in that area, and I'm going to control back to where I started. I'm going to hit the right click, inclination points, right click again, start and stop point, back to running, and back to stabilizing that object. Once I've stabilized it, I'm going to right click, I'm going to satin path, cut it short, go to control for a curve, do the next piece here. I'm going to overlap this one straight a little bit, go over to the other side, go back to a curve, get to where I want to start, right click, stitch directions. I'm going to right click again, start point, stop point, and again running stitch. This was my ending point, so I'm going to make sure that I start close to there so that there's not going to be any unnecessary trims or jumps on my machine. And I'm going to right click to generate, satin path, cut it short, control key, outline the object. I have to pan up a little bit, go straight across. I can move here, give me my overlap once again, and I'm going to hold the control key down, get back towards the top of the design, right click, put my stitch directions in, then I'm going to right click again, put my start, my stop, and go back to my run stitch. Stabilize this one. Few stitches right down the center is all we need to stabilize that. Keep in mind, working at a 6:1 scale, after time you get very comfortable with exactly how many stitches are needed within an object. If you've watched some of our theory DVDs, this is really explained because it allows you to see the same thing on screen over and over again. And after a while, you'll have very little editing of your designs because you know exactly what you see on screen. You know exactly how it's going to sew out on the machine. Inclination points, right click, start, and stop points. I'm going to go back to my run. I'm going to run across to the next object, make sure that I can see it on screen. I'm going to put some stabilizing stitches in there to hold everything in place. Right click, back to satin path, cutting it short a little bit, going to my control to give me a curve, coming over to the other side, making sure my over and underlap are in place, control to give me a curve on the outside, right click, stitch directions once again, and then I'm going to right click, start, stop, and I'm ready to go back to a running stitch so that I'm pathing through this design. When this sews on the machine, you're going to see that it's going to actually sew very smoothly. You're not going to have any trims or jumps in the design. You're going to actually have a nice flow when the design is stitching. Come over to this side, hold the control key down, give me a curve onto this side. I'm cutting it short a little bit here. I'm going to right click, put my stitch directions in, and when I get here I'm going to right click again, start at the top, end at the bottom. However I want this design to flow, that's how I'm actually going to lay down my stitches. Go to my run stitch, stabilizing my last little piece. I'm going to right click, and now I'm going to use again my satin path. I'm going to cut it short, use the control. This one can be fairly true to the artwork because it's not overlapping in any area whatsoever. And I get back to where I started. I'm going to right click, inclination points, and when I finish I'm going to right click again for my start and stop. And what we've done is we've finished our first color in the design. Let's take a quick look. We're going to go to fit to screen, and I'm going to turn on the 3D, and you can see that we have created all of the satin stitches within that flower. Now let's digitize the center of the flower. Let's turn the 3D off and go back to our 6:1 scale, and I'm going to digitize the center of this, and we're going to use a fill stitch. So I'm going to now, I know I ended here, I'm going to choose my line tool, but I'm going to use my complex fill. Now we're going to have the fill running in this direction, and I do have to account for the push and the pull, so I'm going to actually cut short my first point on the top of the circle. I'm going to start right about here. Then I'm going to hold the control key down, and I'm going to go all the way to the outside edge of the artwork, and when I get to the bottom I'm going to cut short the bottom stitch a little bit as well, and then I'm going to control around the other side for a curve. When I get back to where I started, I'm going to stop my point right about there, and I'm going to close the shape. I'm going to change my inclination point from one side to the other so I have a nice horizontal stitch. I'm going to then right click, which gives me my start point and my stop point, and now I have the center of the flower. I'm going to take my plus key, go down to my last point, which is the fill. I'm going to change the color, and let's make it a nice light brown color, and I'm going to also change the fill type, and we'll choose a random fill, so when this stitches out we're going to get more of a realistic look within the design. Now we're ready for the last step. We're going to turn the 3D off so that I can see the artwork behind the areas that I've digitized, and I'm going to do a running stitch around every element of this design. I want to make sure that I have exactly 2 running stitches in every single element, so there's going to be 2 passes of thread, and with that I have to do a little bit of mapping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my line tool with my run stitch. I'm going to choose black for the outline, and I know that I ended at the bottom. This was my stop point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pan down to this area of the screen. This is where I'm going to start, so that it's going to start closest to where it ended. Now I'm going to put down a point right here, starting from the inside, and I'm going to follow pretty much right on the artwork that I see, and I can start to go around the path of the stitch. Now if I come to this point, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom because the black is true to the artwork and I have cut my other object short, and I'm going to go down one side and back around the other so that I have exactly two paths of running stitches in that point. Then I'm going to come to the point here. I don't really have to use a curve because at 6 to 1 my stitch points are placed far enough apart that I know I'm not going to break any of my rules and have too many stitches close together, and I do want them to be fairly accurate as they lie on top of each other. That way I know I'm going to have a nice even design. So I'm going to continue to go around all of these points. This one here, I'm going to go up to the end. I'm going to outline this piece because it is underneath of the others. I'm going to then come to this point here. I'll continue to go around, and I'm really doing the outside objects first. So I'm going to pan over with my arrow keys. I'll do this point right here. This one now has two paths, and I know that I'm finished. I'll continue on to the next one. I'm going to go up along this side, make sure that I continue along. This one now is going to have two paths, and as I move along I know I need to complete this piece. I'll continue to go around. I'll start at this one here. I'll put my points in, and as I put each point down I'm making sure that I'm turning fairly smoothly. I do not want to have too many points close to each other. If you have too many points in a design, what you're going to do is you're going to make your machine have thread breaks, needle breaks, bird's nests. Too many stitches in one place on any design will cause all of those things to happen. So I want to make sure that I path around this design knowing that I'm not coming too close with my points, but completing each object with two paths, and then I'll continue on to the next. When I get to this point here, again I'm going to have a path going this way. I know then I have to go back. I'm going to cover up that area. I'll go over to this one, and I'll continue all the way around the design. And the areas that I digitized first with my satin stitch, those are the ones that I'm covering up right away. You have to remember that when you're doing embroidery and you're laying down thread on material, you are going to cause some distortion within the material as you're laying down those stitches. So this really helps to cover the areas that you did first, and that way you're going to have more success for that design to be registration correct. Things are going to line up perfectly, and you won't have to worry about those running stitches not lining up as you're digitizing the design. Now here is pretty much where I started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back, and I've started my second path. With this area here, I have to come over, and now I have two paths in that area. This is being also covered with two paths of running stitch. Now continue on. I can pan through the design using my arrow keys, and I'm going to make sure that my points are fairly close up. At 6 to 1 you shouldn't have any problem because you are zoomed in 600%, so even if you are off a little bit, it really won't make a difference, because when you go back down to that 1-to-1 scale, everything should line up just fine. And now we have two paths there. We're going to continue to go around this design, and we're covering up all the areas where we were before. And I'm going to path over. I have to come down and complete this area right here, and I'm going to continue around. I don't want to go back up this side because I've already been there, and I'll come down the other side. Two paths everywhere in the design, two layers of stitches. I don't want one in some areas and three in others. So this is where you have to think a little bit while you're digitizing and make sure that you're putting exactly 2 paths of thread for all of these outline stitches that we're creating. Now I'm going to come back over here, come down to where I started, finish the area on the inside, and then continue to put my 2 paths around the outside. Again, I'm coming and finishing the area towards the inside, and I'm almost done. When I get back to where I started, I'm going to make sure that I use my arrow keys to see the area on the screen, and now I'm pretty much back to where I started. All I have to do at this point is to outline that circle, and if you notice, I'm outlining the circle at the very end, and the reason being is that fill stitch was the absolute last thing that I did, and everything is going to line up perfectly in this design when it stitches out on your machine. So now we are almost back to where I started. I'm going to put a little extra stitch in there. I'm going to right click, and now I have exactly 2 paths everywhere in this design. Let's go to our 100% or fit to screen, and we can see that we have the outlines. I'm going to go to my 3D rendering, and everything lines up perfectly. Once you've finished digitizing this design, you'll have used all the tools within this software effectively to create a satin stitch, a running stitch, and a fill stitch. And all of the theory that we used to create this design, as far as digitizing the colors in the right order and digitizing all the objects so that the objects that are behind others are done first, you'll have built up a design that is mapped properly. Now once you do this, every other design that you create is done much in the same manner. It's a matter of practice, and we will cover a little bit more about artistic digitizing. What I want to do is I want to take this flower, and we're actually going to digitize some of these petals, but instead of using a satin stitch, we're going to use fill stitches, and we're going to try to create some depth and dimension by using our freehand tool to create some blending as well. Now let me show you how I can take this same piece of artwork, but this time I'm going to actually use some stitch blending techniques to make this flower look realistic. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in to 600%, and I'm going to use my arrow keys to pan my design across and see the area that I want to do. I'm probably going to do these 5 petals to give you this effect. Now I'm going to choose my run stitch. I'm going to tie in my stitch and put some underlay in. I'm going to right click. Now I want to choose in my sequence view that object. Let's change the color of the stitch, and now I'm going to choose my satin path. I'm going to put my first point right here, hold my control key down, come up to the point, not put my control key down, and then continue down the other side. This way I have a nice sharp point at the top. I'll go around to the other side. I'm going to close the shape this time, put my inclination point in the center, and then fan my stitches in towards either side. Right click, use my start and my stop. Now I've fanned these stitches. I'm going to use my run. I'm going to run over to the other side. I'm going to put my points in, and I will generate the running stitches. Again, I'll go to my satin path, put my first point down, hold the control key down for a curve, take it off for a straight point, continue on with the curve. I'm going to come in towards the center, come to the other side, close the shape, put my stitch direction down the middle, and fan the stitches down either side. And I'm going to right click, start and stop, and then I'm going to use my run stitch, run down towards the center. At this point it would probably make a lot more sense for me to generate this stitch and turn my 3D stitches off so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to use my satin path. I'm going to put my first point down. I'm going to hold my control key down, outline the shape, take the control key off for my straight point, control down for the other side, and when I get towards the center of this, I'm actually going to do a little zigzag. The reason being is I don't want any hard stitches towards the center of the flower where I'm going to have a fill. I'm going to close that shape. I'm going to put my stitch direction down the center. I'm going to make sure that I fan the stitches towards either side. I'm going to right click, start and stop. I'm going to choose my run stitch, pan over. We'll do this petal here, and now I'm going to come over to the side, generate those running stitches, go back to my satin path, put my first point down, hold the control key down for a curve, take it off for a straight point, hold it down again for a curve, come to this point here, come straight in, zigzag these points, pan over a little bit so I can see it, come back to the other side, close that shape, put my inclination point right down the center, fan the stitches so that they fan from the center from one side to the other, right click, start and stop, and then I just have one more to do. Go back to my run stitch, start where I ended off on the last object that I did. Let's put a few stitches in here. I'll come back down to this side. I'm going to right click to generate those stitches, go back to my satin path, and now I'll put my point down, hold the control key down, and again when I get to the top, take it off so I have a straight point, hold the control key down again, come to this point, come into the inside, zigzag these stitches a little bit so that I don't have any hard stitches in the center of the design, close that shape, and now I'm going to fan these stitches as well from the center out, and let's right click, start point, stop point, and now I have a nice fanned effect. Now if I look at this, let's bring this to fit to screen. I can see this on screen and I have a satin stitch with all of those areas. Well, that looks pretty good, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight that area and I'm going to turn it to a random fill and apply it. And now you can see we have a very realistic look. Let's change that to maybe about 5 millimeters and we'll apply it, and we won't have very many hard stitches in that area at all. Now let's turn our 3D off, and I want to come back into my 600% view, and what I'm going to do now is I know I ended off here, so I'm going to choose a darker color. I'm going to go to my freehand tool this time. I'm going to choose my running stitch. I'm going to choose a darker color, and then I can just simply come over here and I can freehand from the center out of that, trying to cover that same area, come up towards this side, put a few stitches in here, come towards the center, freehand towards the center, short and long stitches. I'm used to the 6:1 view. I can just put as few or as many stitches in there as I want, and we're going to take that and we're going to fan it towards the outside. I'm going to then generate those stitches by right clicking. I'm going to change those stitches. I'm going to highlight it in my sequence view. I want those to be about 5 millimeters as well. I'm going to hit the apply, and now when I turn the 3D rendering on, you're going to see that I have a very nice blending effect within those petals. If I go to fit to stitch, you can see how realistic that's starting to look. Now that you've learned all the tools within this software, you really need to put them into practice, and that's exactly what digitizing is. It's practicing everything you learn over and over again. The more you digitize and the more you practice the techniques that you learn, the better you're going to get and the happier you're going to be with the results. Now, software is part of the equation. You also need to learn the theory of how stitches are created. And we do have other educational tools that go into more depth on how to actually accelerate your digitizing experience. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you have lots of fun with this software. All the tools are here. You can basically create whatever you want as long as you put the time and effort into digitizing the design.